Aloha and welcome back for Storytime with Tutu. Today we're going to be reading our chapter Omen Readers, Seers, and Prophets. Enjoy.
Aloha. It's been a while, but I'm back. So our story, which is the fourth in the book, is titled Hakahaka Leo or Ha'i Ōuli, which means Omen Readers, Seers, and Prophets. And here again we have a beautiful sketch from the book just to share. He kind of looks like Koko Willis, who is the, I guess, great-grandson of Kaili Ohe. So, and I may be wrong. I have to go back and check. So let me start off. Since the beginning of time, there have been seers and prophets living in our islands. Ali'i prophets were often part of a group called that served the chiefs. Chiefs wanted a prophet close at hand at all times to consult in regard to wars, his health, his future in general, and the future of his enemies. Some of these prophets only prophesied things the chief wanted to hear. And the chief, hearing and wanting these things to happen, would act accordingly. The Ali'i had other prophets that would not lie, but told things as they really saw them. Some of these were put to death for being so truthful. The ancient ones, which is the pre-Ali'i, had many men and women who had been born with the gift of prophecy. These people we saw as special. It is our belief that these people were very old souls who had come back into flesh to help others. Sometimes this was a family member, a close family member, or someone of a far branch of the extended family we call Ohana La'a. We called these people Kaula. It meant prophet, but it meant more than that. It meant pure energy, a true light carrier. Many of these prophets were also teachers. Around their schools, halal, and temples, heiau, they had many white tea plants growing and kukui trees. These were a sign to any who needed refuge that this was a place safe from the storms of weather or the storms of life. Kaula were not people who would seek the limelight. You had to seek them out if you had need of such a one. All were welcome at their door, Ali'i and commoner alike. Some of these holy ones asked questions or requested certain things be brought from the forest or the sea to help him read the signs. Some had no need of anything except a question, and the truly great ones did not even need the question. Not all Kaula found the answers the same way. Some shut their eyes and seemed lifeless. They would seem to not breathe. While in this state, they said they could go to family in spirit, the future or the past, to find the answer. Some said they would consult the family, amokua. The sex of the kaula was of no importance. Their ability, energy, and force was all that mattered. My own kumu teacher, Makaveli, was a great prophetess and seer. The greatest kaula in our family, however, had been Kiha Vahine of Hana, Maui. It was her name I was given as my sacred name at birth, because it was hoped that I had been blessed with her mana, or her ability strength. Makaveli was to teach me the things a seer or sacred one should know. On Moloka'i, the term kaula was not often used, but then kahuna was seldom used either. Perhaps this was because we had some of the most outstanding prophets, seers, and sorcerers of Hawaii, nay, living on our island. Lanikaula of Pu'uko'o was a great one. Kaiakea was perhaps just as great, but in different areas, and his daughter, the famous Makaveli, were just a few. When I was about 13 years old, there was a memorable experience involving one of the elders of our family. I do not know the name of the prophet who was involved in this happening, but the incident has always remained fresh in my memory. My great uncle had broken his hip and it would not heal. The bone doctor had worked on him, but the bone would not stay in place. The elders sent prayers to our ancestors, and all of us who loved him also prayed in our own way. Offerings were made at the family altar. The herb doctor gave him medicine so he would not be in pain, but still he did not get well. One morning, my uncle asked that he be carried to the Kukui Heiau in East Ohia. It was an agricultural heiau, but Uncle had heard they had a great healer there. It was quite a trip to carry an old man, but Uncle was greatly loved and his request was honored. The elders chose 4 strong young men to carry Uncle Pu'u, and the elders followed behind. Food was carried for the journey, and mats so they could rest along the way. This healer was not of our family, and it was not known if he would see or help my uncle. Along the way, the elders prayed. This whole procedure was most unusual. Family treated family. Everyone felt great suspense. Those of us who stayed behind tried not to worry, but let the spirit family take care of Uncle and the elders on their journey. Uncle Pu'u'olani had been one of the ruling chiefs of our ohana for many years. He was very aged, but his mind was quick and his eyes bright. Before they started on the journey, he asked the elders to pick another to sit at the aha, or his council, for him until he recovered. Pe'elua, my father, was picked. So he had gone with the elders on the journey to Kukui Heiau. It was from him that I heard the story in detail when they returned. The trip to the Heiau had been without incident. No one had called to them. There had been no barking dogs. The skies had been blue and clear. A high-arched rainbow walked ahead of them. As they approached the Heiau, a man came toward them. It was a strong youth in his mid-20s. He told the man that he knew who they were and why they had come. He told them they brought Uncle a long, long way for nothing, for his hip had already begun to heal. Uncle was old, but he would live a long time. Then he looked straight to Manu, my cousin, who had helped carry Uncle, and told him to get his house in order, for his time was near. There was no way this young man could have known who they were, or why they had come seeking aid. They asked if he was the one they sought, for they had expected a sage of great years. He smiled in answer and invited them into the heiau for rest and food. They rested that night at the heiau, and the young man and others like him giving them food and seeing to their wants. The next day they began the return journey home. Now that Uncle knew he would live, he was at peace and quite merry. He did not feel ready to walk to his ancestors. When people died and did not wish to go, or died quickly, as in a battle or some accident, they sometimes stuck around in spirit doing mischief. It was for this reason that we wanted all the ohana to feel at peace when it was their time to go. The Amalkua was waiting for them, would make the walk easy for them, and make them welcome. It was the job of the family in flesh to help each other be at peace within ourselves, especially when we were about to leave this life and this body. When someone, as Uncle had done, stubbornly refused to go, we did all we could to help them stay. We were taught from the time we could understand that there are no accidents. All things happen for a reason. We may not know what the reason is or the moment, but to always be happy even for misfortune, for with it comes some wisdom that we could not have had otherwise. In Uncle Pu'u's case, he lived several more years. Uncle had some difficulty walking after that and used a stick or cane, but when he finally passed over, it was in his sleep with a smile on his face. My Hanai mother and my cousins who lived with me at the halau felt perhaps Uncle Pu'u had to go through such pain so that Manu could know it was time for him to go. He was the young man who carried Uncle's leg on the journey and whose death was foreseen. No one spoke of what the healer had said about my cousin Manu, but no one forgot. I expect it was heavy on his mind as well. He made many trips into the forest alone and to the heiau at night, when it was easier to speak to the gods and ancestors. Manu was still quite young. He and his wahine, his woman or his wife, had 3 small children, a newborn at the time, a little girl who was just beginning to walk, and a small boy of 3 years. Manu was a good man, a good fisherman, a good net maker, a good bird catcher, and a good father. He was quick in his mind and kind and thoughtful of others. He was already being considered changing in the world around us. Many foreigners had come to Hawaii. Lahaina Luna was full of them, and more were coming all the time. They had been able to push Liho Liho, or Kamehameha II, around. But the family understood that, for he was an even-tempered man and not sharp-witted. He was also easily used by any who gave him liquor. Now, there was a new king, Kaui Keao Ōuli, his younger brother, Kamehameha III, who had been raised skillfully under the wing of Boki and Liliha. Kau Keao Ōuli was a smart man. He had been taught to read and write by the long necks, the missionaries. He carried the mana of his ancestors. Why then was he turning against his own people? Why was he taxing us so highly? Why was he sending men out as friends to snoop and see how many pigs and dogs each household had? How many fish ponds? How large a garden? One family member told us that he heard that all the money being collected went into the pants of Garrett Judd, and he would allow the king only money for certain things. They said in Lahaina they called Judd King Judd. The family was greatly troubled, and talk went on until dawn. So it was, as I embarked upon many years of greater learning, the omens were already there. Our world was changing around us. None of us spoke of the prophecy of Makaveli that they would run us over and stamp us out. But there were none among us who did not carry the thought. When I look back upon those days from later years, it was not difficult to understand. Our own teachings of love and light had made us vulnerable. We welcomed the foreigners with aloha. When they asked for this or that, we tried hard to make them happy. We did not know that man thought they could own things like land or ocean rights. These things were for all of us to use. The ali'i parceled off things for their own use, but with a new ali'i chief, these things changed. Our rights were curtailed only temporarily. The foreigners were not able to see or understand how we believed, and from their pathway on to the mountain, we were not able to see how they thought and felt from ours. We of Moloka'i believed in the light. We tried to keep our bowls full of pure energy and to light the paths of all who came our way. Our people had been taught by holy men who had come to our shores centuries earlier that there was an enlightened one. They spoke of him as if the sun shone from his back, and the ali'i had copied this on their burning back kapu. When the missionaries came, they showed us pictures of Jesus. He was surrounded by light. The stories they told us from their Bible book were full of loving one another. So we all became Christians. I became a Christian many times. I found that I was also pa'a, locked into the past. I continued to go to the halau to meditate and spend hours in meditation. I could see nothing wrong in trying to keep my bowl full of light. It was difficult for me to understand why the foreigners did not wish to see anything from where we stood on the mountain. In my years of schooling at the halau, I had learned my lessons well and knew you do not question the teachers, and kept many questions in my heart. Others did the same. I was observant, however, and I listened to what was said and what was being done. What the foreigners said and what they did was not always the same. This was their stone, and so I let it be. My heart was often overflowing with tears I could not shed, and was being often frightened. One of the men who came to our island to teach us love told us that we should have only one man. Yet he slept with my niece, and she was not his wife. These rules, these new laws, these new teachings, these new people were destroying us. The ali'i, with all their might, had not been able to do what was now being done without a fight, a war, or a wave of his hand. We were being destroyed with ideas that we could not understand. I tried to help those foreigners. I spent many hours removing myself from my family, calming the fears that constantly arose within me. I must be strong. I must continue, for Hawaii must continue. The first year after my dedication, I was kept busy learning chants. There were chants for everything. Chants to begin the day and chants to end it. Chants that were said only at night and chants said only during the day. During that time, I began to realize why we had been trained so skillfully in memorizing fast and correctly. Family chants of my mother's bloodline were far easier than those of my famous grandfather, Kai Akea. The Maui lines of the family and their descendants told of length of rule, age, when someone died, things that certain people were remembered for, great deeds and small, their wives, and if one wife came from another line, then the husbands, what that line was. These were easily learned. The chants of the history of the early ones, the pre-ali'i, or poi au hiva, were far harder. Some of the students of our halau had been working on them for many years. After a few months, I found I even dreamed chants, learning in sleep to perfect one, tone, delivery, and volume. During this time, we were taught signs and the meaning of signs. All our teaching intertwined like vines. The chants, the teachings, the meditation were as one. The long years of preparation in strict obedience, paying attention to the smallest detail and not wasting time with silly chatter, were now bearing the fruit of our toil. We were excited about our lessons. There was so much to learn. Near the end of that first year, there was a feeling of unrest in our school. Our kumu spent many nights on her prayer platform in deep meditation. During the days, we could feel the strain she was under. She told us that our lesson time was growing shorter, and there was much to learn. We continued to learn new chants and teachings. We also began to have lessons on healing and how to conduct Ho'oponopono, how to correct. Where it was needed, we learned faith healing, herbal medicine, signs to look for in a patient, and what herbs helped which ailment. We took trips into the mountain and by the seashore. These trips were loved by us all. We would practice our chanting as we journeyed. On more than one occasion, we would leave in the company of one of the older, more experienced students, leaving our teacher behind in meditation, and then find her waiting for us at the seashore or at a certain spot high on the mountaintop. I knew nothing was impossible, and I cannot say I was surprised. Now I wish I was able to do the same. That was not meant to be. As time progressed, we learned more history and lessons taught by our elder early ancestors. We were taught also in things we had always known, but had not been taught. These were called ohana knowledge. These were things we had brought with us from our lifetimes. We studied ourselves and why we had returned at this special time and place. Each person's lesson was different at that time. Each of us was her own teacher. We had to go into ourselves for every answer. This was a time for self-knowledge. To be help to others, we had to know our own failings and strong points. It was a time for self-healing. We tried to keep ourselves in balance, for as our knowledge grew, so did our power. Power can be used for good or evil. Temptations were many, and we could fool ourselves easily into thinking we were doing something for someone else, when it was to bring glory to ourselves. As the years progressed, one fading into the other, we continued our chants and stories of the ancient ones. They were full of meaning, and we loved the stories, so it made it easier. As we became more knowledgeable about the past and its people, the individuals in the chants became alive to us. They were no longer just names in a chant. I could see why the family always spoke of family in spirit. They were so much like us in so many ways. I found I had favorites that I spoke to, and I felt I often was answered, so that they were aware of my feelings. I could see many of them in my mind's eye. I began to understand them and why they had done certain things and why they felt the way they did. I fell in love with my ancestors. They were as much a part of me and my life as the food I ate and the water I drank. My last year in the halal continued much of what I had been studying already. My world had become much bigger than I had ever dreamed. I had learned to see things with my heart. not just the body, I, that I. I was beginning to view things in a different dimension. The understanding and knowledge that were to be mine were just becoming a small glimmer of what was to come. That year brought many changes in the world around me that were not part of my schooling, not of Makaveli school anyway. Visits to the family circle brought news from our island and other islands. 2 of my sisters had married. Some of our family had gone to Lahaina and others to Honolulu. Kaui ke Ōuli, Kamehameha III, was still king, but the foreigners' sin seemed to run the government. The family members who had been to the cities and had returned shook their heads as they told of the sailors and the goings on. There was much shaking of heads, and everyone questioned everyone else about how could this be. What was happening? There was both the shock at how things were going in the city and refusing to believe that it could be so bad. I could do nothing about it, so I turned away from the things they talked about. I worked on my teachings, my lessons, and my chants. I worked on my own growth. In dreams, we had ways of telling ourselves simple truths. These were things we needed to tend to, but put aside or forgotten. Dreams were the spiritual self speaking to the body. Messages were often simple and to the point. A journey in a dream was our journey through life on earth. This could be walking or riding a horse or donkey. You could see the person in the dream as someone of a person you looked up to. That was the good in you. When you dreamed about a person you did not care for, or did not trust, that was your own negative side. When dreaming of an enclosure, a house, or a small area in which you were confined, the dream was about your own body. It was important to pay attention to repairs needed in your dream. Dreams were what would, in later years, be called a road map. Dreams were useful as ways to learn lessons begun in the day, and a problem taken to bed could be solved when you awoke in the morning. Forgotten facts could be brought to mind, chants and songs learned. It was very useful. Dreams of flying were spiritual dreams. These were dreams beyond the earth state. They were of an eternal nature and of many lifetimes. It was a returning to the condition and place, the state, where we were between lifetimes. We were with our spirit, Ohana. As the Hawaiian people turned from their old ways and became members of this or that flock, those of us who loved our old ways and believed in keeping our bowl of light were watched closely. Members of our own families spied on us, withdrew from us, and told on us. In all things, we had to be most careful. There was a division in the land and division in the minds and hearts of our people. It was a time of trial. And that concludes this particular chapter. This was the 4th chapter in our book. So, it's very powerful. Until next time, aloha and mahalo.